Ex-prisoners of Reddit who have served long sentences, what were the last few days like leading up to your release? I did a year in rehab and met a guy who did 25 years in prison for murder. I asked him a lot about what it was like inside and getting out and what it was like now that he was out. He said he felt scared when he was getting out and kind of sad because of all the people he was leaving. He'd been in that specific prison for over 8 years and knew almost everyone and had some close friendships that he missed. He felt lonely after he left and was actually glad that his halfway house was alive in year-long rehab. It felt familiar to him. He did have a lot of trouble getting work though. I asked my friend this since we are sitting at a diner. He said, "You get excited and depressed at the same time. Excited for the freedom. Depressed because you will have a hard time getting a job." He had been sentenced for 18, serving just shy of 13. He's doing well for himself and works on hot water heaters for a living. I did 15 years 9 MTHS. Got paroled. And I didn't want anyone to know. Too many prisoners get flopped by the parole board. I did a 6-month flop. And they get angry at the guys who get paroled. Guys will fight you just to try and get your parole taken. Or some will see it as a chance to steal. Hey, he's going home. He don't need that sheet. And he sure ain't gonna fight for it. I gave most of my stuff to lifers long timers who didn't have family to send them money. So the last few days were really spent trying to take up the boredom of no way to pass the time. Didn't really work about work. Already had a place to live. I'm one of the fortunate ones. Just worked at keeping my head down and getting out of the gate. You should read The Prison Diaries by Jeffrey Archer. It's a real eye-opener. Some of the long-termers get released gradually back into society, but they struggle to deal with basic things such as using a supermarket they've had so long where every decision is made for them. Making their own decisions suddenly becomes too much to deal with. Your instincts are to lock bad people up and throw away the key, but for many prisoners this is counterproductive and they spend the rest of their lives costing the taxpayer instead of contributing to society. The prison system is broken. Paraphrased from an old friend of mine, excited but also scared and anxious. Partly because he was convinced that somehow they'd reverse his parole. Partly because he was terrified he wouldn't be able to readjust. Was also afraid his relationships with his kids wouldn't be able to recover. Overall, until he actually got out, he was more stressed than excited. But the last few hours, when he realized he was actually getting out, he said those were the longest hours of his life. Simultaneously happy but also thinking, okay, they decided I get to go. Why the hell can't I leave already? Said it was like taking a plane to go on your dream vacation. But the flight takes forever. There's no movie and you forgot to bring a book. Unit 26 at Parkman Penitentiary in MS is for two types of inmates: non-violent drug and alcohol first offenders and long-term inmates on their way out the door. The theory is that those long-term guys need to brush up on their social skills so they get put in with short-time non-threatening drunks and drug users. My buddy's dad came out of a 22-year bid. Said he misses it in some ways. Been a year and don't think he's worked more than 2 days in a row. My buddy has to stay with us because of the unpredictability. On top of that, his nephew or something got sentenced to 9 years. And the circle of broken households continue. My husband is in prison and thinking about his transition home is always kind of nerve-wracking. He is going to need so much. A car. A job. Clothes. Personal items. A phone. etc. So now that he is halfway through his sentence, we have started talking about saving. And he's begun to save money from his paychecks. We also won't be living together right away because we have never lived together outside of prison. And we have to ease into being around each other for more than 9 hours a week. He's really looking forward to getting out, but I see him interact with all of his buddies and I know leaving them will be hard for him. He is lucky enough to have a job lined up when he gets out, but you can't imagine how hard it would be for someone who doesn't. 15 years on the inside doesn't look so good on a resume. Long days and longer nights. A high level of boredom coupled with an underlying excitement and fear about the future. Self-imposed limits on activities and interactions out of concern that something might happen that would affect your release. 10/10 would not recommend. Source: served 9 years between 73 and 82. Nervous of the unknown. Didn't know where I was going to live, what town I was going to parole to after I did treatment. Being able to find a job. Just the fear of the unknown for me. I did 5 years. By that time I made it to a minimum security prison. That means a jail with no walls and no locks. You could easily escape if you wanted, but you would just be an idiot too. The days dragged on slow. I couldn't sleep for the last few weeks. I was anxious and nervous. I had plans to have all types of sex and eat all types of food, but none of my plans panned out the way I imagined they would. I did 11 months. Was a year but got out a little early. A lot of guys told me there was a lot of anxiety, and the weirdest thing was being able to wake up, leave their house and go to bed at whatever time. Being so dependent on the government for so long and then just being released all of a sudden to take care of your own was a lot, even for a lot of adults. Most of them being introduced to probation parole, so there are added hoops to your life as far as getting a job and doing everyday things. When I was released I had a lot of things lined up for me, like going back to school and had a good place to live. So when I got out I was ready to be out. The days leading up were very long days, just watching the clock knowing you are finally going to be out in the real world. I was really nervous knowing I could have not gotten out on that day. But lucky for me I wasn't have got back into school since. I did 14 months in a county jail. The days were long. I played a lot of cards, chess, and I made everyone laugh, including the co's, honestly. Jail saved my life. The days leading to processing out was weird to say the least. I hadn't seen the sun in so long. The weirdest thing was using silverware. I went to eat at a Denny's that morning and my eggs tasted like metal. I didn't know what the duck, and then it dawned on me. I've only been using plastic utensils. I was stoked as duck. You know that sense of euphoria you got on Christmas morning as a kid? It's like that. But it lasts a good year after you get out too. Then life sets in and you realize it's ducking hard to do anything as a convict. Most people just go back to prison. I managed to land a good job in the oil field and stay free. I had all my tattoos removed. Made sure nobody I used to know knew my number or where I was. Then basically just hit the restart button. Most of the people you meet in prison are pieces of shit. Gotta disassociate with them and it makes things much easier. TLDR, felt like Christmas as a kid. And the feeling lasted for a good while. I look forward to the day when our society changes the prison system to one focused on rehabilitation instead of punishment. As someone who grew up elsewhere, I see two major issues: profit motive by prison industrial complex, and the general sentiment of many Americans who view convicted felons as subhuman. Unfortunately, I don't see either issue going away anytime soon. This will get buried probably, but my dad was in prison from 2004 until 2008. He never got out because he died of cancer. But he was allowed to stay in hospital throughout the whole time that he was ill. He was handcuffed to a prison officer for the entire time. The cuffs had a long chain, and the governor of the prison wouldn't have him released or take them off until the doctors could confirm he had 3 months or less left to live. In the end, they only took the cuffs because the prison officers themselves complained. Imagine being cuffed to a dying man while his family are trying to have their final moments with him. He never talked about how he felt and never acknowledged to us openly that he was dying, but I often think about what was going through his head and how unfair it must have felt to never get to walk out of those prison doors as a free man. You go in as a person people around you know. After doing a stretch, even if you keep in contact when you get out, your whole family is strangers. There has been births, deaths, divorces, etc. You don't know these people anymore. Wondering what family life will be like was a thought on my mind. My family friend's relative just got out. He committed a violent crime. It's odd how he got over a decade of being in jail when he'd never hurt anyone, and someone who rapes someone can get off without anything happening to them and get a middle-class job. Seems very unfair. Why not just focus on locking up the sociopaths who want to hurt people and leave non-violent crimes to rehabilitation? Got robbed a few days before I was released. I knew who did it, but I did nothing about it because I knew misery loves company and the individual was going to be locked up for life. Boring, exciting and quite overwhelming. The time slowed right down to the point that getting dinner seemed to take hours instead of 10 minutes. All you can think about is what you've missed out on. How good it will feel to not miss out on the future. All I could talk or think about were my family, friends, hobbies, my neighborhood. Hell, I even missed the way my kitchen door didn't quite shut properly. But after being out of the real world for a length of time, part of me didn't want to leave. I had become comfortable in there, made friends, learned new skills, had some much needed mental health treatment. But on the outside there are so many mistakes you can make. So many temptations and bad decisions. You're in charge of your money and sorting out doctors etc. Having to suddenly organize all that after being out of practice was really hard at first, and I can see how it can break some people and they go back. Either because they want to or can't cope on the outside. The probation service were ducking useless. Unless you consider being pissed off useful. I thank them for nothing. But the prison system, the judge, the psychiatrists and my friends and family I cannot thank enough. My offense was largely due to mental breakdown. I did not hurt anyone. And never would in my right mind. I knew I was becoming unwell and asked for help but didn't get it. The judge agreed that I asked for help and that the mental health service let me down. He wrote a court order that I had to have therapy and psychiatrists etc. I cannot thank him enough. I owe a lot of my life to him. Rehabilitation can work. Close family friends spent the 90s inside for a self-defense case. Prosecutors pushed to manslaughter since he had prior drug offenses and was from a family the police didn't like due to a high-profile case in the 70s involving dodgy cops killing his mother. Sad really, since he was very close to our family but ended up pushing us away since he didn't want to hear about life outside prison. Minded his own business. Got out. Went born again Christian and sadly died of cancer. I did 5 years and the months leading up to release were nerve-wracking. It's exciting to know you're getting out. But in the back of your mind you're just praying every day that something doesn't happen. I kept worrying that I was going to get called down to talk to someone and be told that a mistake was made and I was in fact not getting paroled. Every day for 3 months. Then there are the other inmates. You have to be careful who you let know you're getting out. You don't just skip around letting the whole world know. BC, some people just want to see the world burn and starting a fight would have comparable minimal consequences for them. So it would be either fight back and lose your parole, or sit there and get your ass kicked. So you worry about that a lot. But man, when you finally walk out those doors, it's the most beautiful feeling ever. It's been 3.5 years since I've got out and I'm now married with a good job and my own home. My father worked with an inmate from a local prison back when they were laying in cable for TV in the city. Guy he had was smart and worked hard. Even was interested in cable TV and how to maintain it. My dad offered him a position cause he was getting out in the next few weeks. He refused it. He was from Neck and planned to get off the transport bus, walk up to the nearest officer, punch him, then turn around ready for the handcuffs. When asked why, he said something that still bugs my dad to this day. He said that in prison you get 3 good meals a day, a bed, work and even free time. What was the point of busting his ass for an easy life when it was going to handed to him? As long as you behaved you were set for the rest of your life. The guy knew he would never get a job once getting out. And his family had mostly abandoned him. So it was just easier this way. At the time he was in his late 20s. He had been in and out of prison since he was 14. He only served a few year-long sentences each time. My dad checked back a few weeks after he left and sure enough he decked an office not even 5 minutes after he was free and was in another prison 2 weeks later. I was in daze for a while as a teenager. I remember being scared of being out more so than happy. The routine, the straightforwardness of always doing the same thing every day just got so ingrained into me I didn't know what I was going to do when I got out. When I had got out before I would always go back to the same thing, but I wanted to do better this time. I was lost for a bit and thought I was going straight back to it, but I have a wife and 3 kids now and I'm doing great. Very late to this, but one thing I have realized is don't tell anybody your true end date for your sentence. Tell them 1 year later. Why set yourself up for harassment and being targeted by fellow inmates who are jealous of you? A friend of mine said it is hard because everyone is jealous of you so they harm you, but also it is hard because it is like leaving your home no matter how bad that home may be. My cousin went in for 9 years. He was one of the first to be prosecuted under new statutory laws at the time. He had just turned 18 and his GF at the time was a month or so away from 16. He came out a racist piece of seaweed. I'm not an ex-prisoner. Sorry guys. But I am a criminology major that has been able to get access to some interesting people. One guy I met and talked to was a convicted murderer and heavy drug user who was a week away from his master's degree at the time I spoke with him. He spent 32 years in prison for stabbing a man while drunk one night. He said prison just became a way of life and told us the very creative yet gross and effective weapons they would make out of paper, piss, poop, and other things. He said when he first got out the food was one thing that he was excited about. His first meal out was McDonald's. Also, even though he now has a master's degree in social work, he is having a tough time finding a job. He doesn't tell people he's a convicted murderer until they get to know him because he doesn't want something from the 1980s branded to him before they get to know him for him. Awesome experience, to be honest. Late to party, so this might get buried, but it's oddly relevant right now. My cousin is an official free man on Monday after serving 23 years. He's 41 years old. He says he's excited, but you can tell he's quite overwhelmed with things. Despite being very detail oriented and prepared. He has the next month and a half all planned out in his planner. Day by day. Every trip. Place he must visit. Errand he must run. Everything voluntary and involuntary is mapped out. His goal is to keep busy and continue to cut out any sheet-tier people habits from his past. Fortunately, he already got employment a month-ish ago in construction with work release. Getting his license next week is a pretty huge deal for him. He's still adjusting to handling grief with his family in person versus hearing about it over a phone call. I think in the past he had gotten used to it being impossible to directly help out with family, health, problems because of his incarceration, and now that he's free, he finds it difficult to come to terms with just not being able to help with some issues. Period. He's catching on to smartphones pretty fast since they had tablets in prison that they would use to write family friends emails. All he wants to do is see people and get together. Safely. With those that he hasn't seen in years. Get-togethers have to be relatively small right now. Otherwise it's stressful for him with too much commotion and such. He's looking forward to being able to reconnect, in a good way, with some past prison mates. Who have already been released or will be soon. But on the outside and as free men. The kind of men that helped him get through crappy and tough times while incarcerated. And vice versa. Can't imagine having to spend years locked away. Shit's gotta be tough. I came out completely different socially. I used to love crowds. People. Festivals. Outside concerts. I came out afraid of those things. My crime was non-sexual. Non-violent. I would stay at home in complete silence for days. I had never gotten into any trouble before or since. And I've never been the same. People don't understand prison in America. They think they do. But they don't. They really think there's all this education. Good food. And health care, but prisoners can't itch. There isn't any of that. Not in a real sense. Like you would recognize it. Rehabilitation? That's a joke. No, really, like it's a joke. The running joke with the people who work there. They just want you to shut up. Stop bothering them. So they can finish their blah, blah story. Oh. There's someone having a heart attack. We'll call the infirmary as soon as the game is over. I honestly can't remember much about the days leading up to release. I do remember the bus ride back home though. I've never felt that unreasonably happy. I was smiling like an idiot the entire ride, which was substantial. It was a surreal experience. I still feel the buzz of freedom years later after sheet tons of probation and rehab. Sometimes I'm in a grocery store and it feels crazy to be completely free and anonymous. This wasn't me, but my big brother was serving 7 years in prison, and in the last week he said that he avoided everyone just to make sure they don't mess it up for him when he gets out. I was released from prison about a year and a half ago. I did 5 years for doing multiple pills, blacking out, and setting a house and several trucks on fire. Unfortunately, I was 16 when I committed the crime. The few days before were stressful as hell. Just trying to make time fly by. Doing the same things as every other day. Playing spades. Not watching TV because that makes time go slower. Going to the yard. Playing handball. Etc. My last day. I gave all my belongings except 4 letters, addresses, and a few packs of Marlboros away. Exchanged some numbers and addresses, and realized that I was going home in less than 24 hours. I sat in the shower for almost 3 hours that day, just thinking. It's crazy going in at 16 and coming home at 21. A ton has changed. When I woke up the final morning, after tossing and turning all night, I was nervous as duck, pacing around the dorm all morning, because I decided that somehow they were going to call me to leave earlier than they call everyone else. But I ended up getting called to the front gate at about 8 AM. Had to fill out some paperwork and get told to wait in a few different spots. Got all of my belongings from different jails that somehow got found after years of being lost in the system. And I got walked out, minus the $50 they shorted me from what remained on my commissary account. Now, about a year and a half later, I'm home free. I've got 1-2 years left on parole. And so far no warnings or violations. So here you go, Reddit. This is a brief summary of my last days.